In the shadowed vaults of forgotten prophecies, a single drop of blood sealed the fate of kings. She, the mortal flame, would consume the eternal night. The wind howled through the crumbling spires of Castle Dravenmore like a lament from the grave, carrying the scent of damp stone and distant thunder. Ilara Voss, 28 years old, born in the fog-shrouded alleys of Victorian London to a seamstress mother and a father lost to the opium dens, had come to this forsaken place seeking not salvation but oblivion. Her body, frail from the consumption that gnawed at her lungs like a relentless beast, betrayed her with every ragged breath. Abandoned by her siblings after her diagnosis, disowned by a society that viewed illness as moral failing, she wandered the moors of northern England, drawn by whispers of a healer in the ruins, a myth, perhaps, but myths were all she had left. Her dark hair, once lustrous, now hung limp and tangled, framing eyes hollowed by fever and despair. Deep down, Ilara desired only peace, to slip into the void without the weight of unfulfilled dreams. The sting of lovers who fled her fading beauty, the trauma of watching her mother waste away in similar torment. She pushed open the iron gate with trembling hands, the hinges screeching like tortured souls. The courtyard was a graveyard of overgrown thorns and shattered fountains, illuminated by the pallid glow of a half-moon filtering through storm clouds. Rain began to patter against the cracked marble, each drop a cold kiss on her fevered skin. Ilara clutched her shawl tighter, the wool rough and sodden, as she ascended the steps to the great oak doors. They yielded with unnatural ease, as if the castle itself anticipated her arrival. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of aged velvet and beeswax candles, their flames flickering in ornate candelabras that cast elongated shadows across tapestries depicting ancient battles, vampiric legions clashing with human armies under blood-red skies. Ilara's footsteps echoed on the polished oak floors, worn smooth by centuries of silent prowlers. She paused in the grand hall, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, each beat a reminder of her fragility. Why had she come? The villagers spoke of the castle's master as a ghost, a solitary figure who offered mercy to the dying but exacted a price no one named. Desperation, she thought, was the cruelest of companions. A soft click from the shadows drew her gaze. From the balcony above, he descended the spiral staircase like smoke uncoiling from a dying fire. King Alaric Thorn, eternal ruler of the shadowed realm, appeared not as the monster of legend, but as a man forged in sorrow. Over 5 centuries old, born in the blood-soaked fields of medieval Romania to a warlord father and a mother slain by plague, Alaric had ascended to vampiric immortality through a ritual of desperation during a siege that claimed his mortal life. His pale skin gleamed like marble under the candlelight, framed by raven hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, deep, haunted, reflecting the guilt of empires built on rivers of blood. Ethical to a fault, he had long forsaken the indiscriminate hunts of his kin, confining his existence to the isolation of Dravenmore, where he pondered the weight of eternity. Traumas lingered. The betrayal of his council during the Great Schism, a war that pitted vampire houses against one another, leaving him with a jagged scar across his palm, a reminder of oaths broken and loyalties severed. He desired connection, a tether to the humanity he had lost, yet solitude was his penance for the lives he could not save. "You trespass in a place of endings," Alaric said, his voice a low timbre that resonated like distant thunder, carrying the faint accent of forgotten tongues. He halted at the foot of the stairs, his black velvet coat absorbing the light, making him seem both corporeal and ethereal. Ilara met his gaze, her breath catching at the intensity there, not hunger, but a profound weariness that mirrored her own. "I seek release," she whispered, her voice cracking like dry leaves. "The doctors in the city offer only laudanum and lies. If death dwells here, let it claim me swiftly." He tilted his head, studying her as one might a fragile artifact unearthed from the earth. The rain intensified outside, drumming against leaded windows like impatient fingers. Alaric stepped closer, the air between them thickening with an unspoken tension. Up close, she saw the fine lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hand as he gestured to a nearby chaise upholstered in faded crimson damask. "Sit. The night is young, and you're suffering. It echoes mine." Reluctantly she obeyed, the velvet cool against her heated skin. Alaric knelt before her, his movements graceful, predatory, yet restrained. He did not touch her, but his presence was a tangible force, stirring the air with the faint metallic tang of ancient blood. "I am no harbinger of easy deaths," he confessed, his words laced with philosophical gravity. "Eternity is a curse disguised as a gift. I have watched empires rise and crumble, lovers wither while I endure. To choose life beyond the veil is to invite isolation deeper than any grave." Ilara's mind reeled, rationalizing his words as delirium from her fever. Yet something in his tone, the raw honesty, pierced her defenses. "Then why do you linger in this ruin? Why not join the oblivion you speak of?" A shadow crossed his features, and he extended his scarred palm, the silver ring upon his finger catching the candlelight, a simple band of etched obsidian, symbol of a vow made in blood during the schism, promising redemption through restraint. Because every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in that choice I seek atonement. But prophecies, they bind us tighter than chains. She frowned, the word unfamiliar yet ominous. Prophecies. Alaric rose, turning toward a grand mirror framed in gilded thorns, its surface clouded as if breathing. He did not reflect fully, only a faint silhouette like mist. Long ago, in the heart of our hidden wars, an oracle foretold that a mortal woman, marked by illness and fire in her veins, would be the perdition of the vampire king. She would unravel his throne, ignite rebellion in the shadows. I dismissed it as fable. Until tonight. Ilara's pulse quickened, a chill seeping into her bones despite the fever. The room seemed to close in, the candle flames dancing wildly as wind rattled the panes. She wanted to flee, to deny the pull she felt toward this stranger, this enigma who saw through her facade of resignation. But her body betrayed her, weakness rooting her in place. "I am no destroyer," she murmured, resisting the inexplicable warmth blooming in her chest. "I am already undone." He turned back, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that bordered on pain. "Perhaps, or perhaps you are the light that forces me to confront the darkness I have become." As thunder cracked overhead, illuminating the hall in stark white, Alaric extended his hand, not to claim, but to offer. In that moment, the air hummed with possibility, the scent of rain mingling with something sweeter, like roses long wilted. Ilara hesitated, her fingers hovering near his. The choice loomed, invisible yet omnipresent, to grasp the mortal end she craved, or to step into a mystery that promised both salvation and ruin. Outside, lightning forked the sky, and in its flash she glimpsed movement in the tree line. Shadowy figures, cloaked and watchful, as if the kingdom itself held its breath. What if the prophecy was not her curse, but his awakening? Ilara's fingers trembled in the charged air, inches from Alaric's outstretched hand, as if the space between them were a chasm bridged only by fragile trust. The thunder's rumble faded into a low growl, leaving the hall in a hush, broken only by the relentless tattoo of rain on the windows. She withdrew, her palm pressing against the damp chill of the chaise, grounding herself in the familiar ache of her body. This man, this being, spoke of prophecies and perdition as if they were lovers entwined in the dark, and yet his eyes held no malice, only a quiet storm of longing that made her own despair feel less solitary. "I cannot," she said, her voice a threadbare whisper, laced with the coppery taste of blood from a recent cough. To touch you would be to invite whatever madness this place harbors. I came for an end, not riddles wrapped in velvet shadows. Alaric lowered his hand slowly, the obsidian ring glinting like a captured knight as it caught the candle's wavering light. He did not press. Instead, he moved to the hearth, where embers smoldered in a grate carved with serpentine vines, their forms twisting like forgotten oaths. With a gesture fluid as water over stone, he coaxed the flames higher, the wood crackling to life and casting a warm, golden glow that danced across the tapestries. The heat reached Alara like a hesitant embrace, easing the shivers that racked her frame, though it did little for the deeper cold gnawing at her soul. "Sit by the fire," he urged, his tone gentle, almost paternal, yet underscored by the weight of centuries. "The night outside is merciless, and your frailty demands respite. Prophecies can wait. Suffering cannot." She rose unsteadily, her skirts whispering against the floorboards, and followed him to the fireside. The room's textures enveloped her, the plush give of an armchair upholstered in worn brocade, the faint must of ancient books lining the walls, the subtle creak of the castle settling like an old beast sighing in sleep. Alaric poured from a crystal decanter into a goblet etched with thorny roses, something dark and viscous. Not wine, but it smelled of earth and iron, a potion perhaps born of the moors. He offered it without explanation, and she accepted, the liquid warming her throat with an unnatural vitality that quelled the fire in her lungs for a fleeting moment. As the flames licked higher, painting their faces in flickering amber, Alaric settled into the shadows opposite her, his form half obscured by the wing of his chair. "Tell me of your life, Alara Voss," he said, the name rolling from his lips, as if he had known it long before she uttered it. "Not the illness that chains you, but the woman it eclipses. In my endless nights, I have learned that true perdition begins with forgetting the light we once held." She stared into the fire, the heat blurring her vision, and the words spilled forth like confessions to a confessor who could not judge. Born in the soot-choked streets of Whitechapel, she had sewn gowns for the elite by day, dreaming of a stage where her voice, rich and untrained, could command the world. But fever had stolen that dream, leaving her abandoned by the brother who inherited their mother's thimble and the suitor who whispered endearments until her pallor turned him away. Trauma layered upon trauma. The night she held her mother's hand as consumption claimed her, the bitter gall of rejection from a society that prized health as virtue. "I desired love," she admitted, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of her shawl. "But it fled like smoke. Now I seek only the dignity of a quiet death away from pitying eyes." Alaric listened, his scarred palm resting open on the armrest, the ring's etchings seeming to pulse with the fire's rhythm. Guilt shadowed his features, a mask carved from regrets deeper than hers. "I too sought dignity once," he murmured, his voice weaving through the crackle of logs. "In the fields of Wallachia, amid the clamor of swords and the cries of the dying, I was Alaric the Bold, son of a king who taught me war's cruel arithmetic. But plague took my mother, and in the siege of my 25th year, as cannon fire rent the night, I chose the blood right, not for power, but to avenge her, to shield my people from invaders. Immortality came as a shroud, not a crown." He paused, the fire's glow illuminating the fine veins beneath his translucent skin, like rivers frozen in time. The wars followed. Vampire houses fractured in the Great Schism, alliances shattered like glass under boot. My council, brothers in eternity, betrayed me for a throne they coveted, their blades drawing this scar during a parley-turned ambush. I spared them, binding my soul to restraint, to this isolation. Yet the prophecy haunts. A mortal woman, bearer of inner fire, destined to topple my realm. You arrived on a night of omens, Alara, your eyes burning with the fever that mirrors the oracle's words. Outside, the rain softened to a mournful patter, but the wind carried echoes, distant howls, perhaps wolves, or something more sinister. Alara's heart stuttered, rationalizing his tale as fevered fancy, yet the air hummed with truth's undercurrent. She resisted the pull, this inexplicable draw toward his sorrow, telling herself it was delirium's gift. But her gaze lingered on the ring, its obsidian depths reflecting fragments of flame, a symbol of vows unbroken amid betrayal. "Rise," Alaric said suddenly, standing with predatory grace. He led her to the grand mirror, its gilded frame looming like a portal to forgotten selves. As they approached, Alara saw her reflection clearly, pale, hollow-cheeked, a ghost of the woman she might have been. Alaric stood beside her, his image a mere haze, as if eternity refused to be captured. "Look," he commanded softly. "See not what is, but what could be. The choice is yours, to fade into the glass's silence or to etch your mark upon it." She reached out, her fingertips brushing the cool surface, and in that touch, a vision flickered, not hers, but his. Battlefields awash in crimson, a throne room echoing with accusations, a lone figure offering a hand in the dark. The prophecy's weight pressed upon her, not as curse, but as mirror to her own fractures. Love, she thought, resisted yet blooming like a thorned rose in barren soil, was this. Two broken souls recognizing the redemption in shared shadows. But as her hand lingered, a shadow stirred beyond the window pane, a cloaked figure, eyes gleaming like embers in the night, vanishing into the mist. Alaric tensed, his hand closing over hers on the glass, the ring's chill seeping into her skin. "They come," he whispered, voice laced with dread. The council senses the prophecy's stir. "If you stay, Alara, you choose not just life, but war." Her breath caught, the dilemma coiling like smoke. Flee to her mortal end, or stand with him, inviting the kingdom's fury upon them both. In the mirror's depths, their reflections blurred into one, and she wondered if perdition was not destruction, but the terrifying beauty of being seen. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water under Alara's touch, the vision dissolving into fragments of crimson and shadow, leaving only the chill of Alaric's hand anchoring hers to the glass. His grip was firm, yet yielding, a paradox of strength born from restraint, and in that contact, she felt the first true tremor of fear, not for her fragile mortality, but for the unraveling world he inhabited. The cloaked figure beyond the window had vanished into the mist-shrouded night, but its presence lingered like a predator's scent, sharp and metallic, mingling with the hearth's smoky warmth. "They will not wait for dawn," Alaric murmured, his breath stirring the fine hairs at the nape of her neck, close enough now that she could discern the subtle rhythm of his undead pulse. A faint, ethereal throb against her skin. He released her hand, stepping back with measured grace, his black coat swirling like ink in water. The ring on his finger caught the firelight once more, its obsidian facets whispering of bindings forged in blood and betrayal. "The council has spies in every shadow. If they sense you as the prophecy's fulfillment, they will come not to parley, but to sever the thread before it weaves tighter." Alara turned from the mirror, her reflection fracturing into a mosaic of pallor and resolve, the fever's heat pulsing in her temples like a distant drum. She wanted to dismiss it all, the oracle's words, the lurking eyes, as the castle's gloom playing tricks on her weakened mind. Yet the air hummed with urgency, the rain's patter quickening to a frantic rhythm against the panes, as if the storm itself conspired to drown their secrets. "And if I leave now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the cough that clawed at her throat, suppressed only by the strange elixir's lingering balm. "Will your kingdom's shadows pursue me to my grave?" Alaric's eyes, stormy depths flecked with silver, met hers without evasion. He crossed to a heavy oak table laden with ancient tomes bound in cracked leather, their spines etched with runes that seemed to shift in the candlelight. Selecting one, he opened it with reverence, The pages yellowed and brittle, releasing a scent of aged parchment and faint incense. The prophecy is no mere tale, Alara. It was etched during the schism's zenith, when vampire lords vied for dominion in hidden courts beneath the Carpathians. A mortal flame shall ignite the king's perdition, it reads, her touch unraveling thrones woven in night. My counsel, remnants of those traitors I spared, clings to power through fear. They believe you herald their end, a catalyst for rebellion among the lesser houses weary of my mercy. He traced a finger along the illuminated script, the ink vivid as fresh blood against the vellum, and Alara leaned closer, drawn despite herself. The words blurred in her vision, but their weight pressed upon her chest, heavier than the consumption's grip. She had always rationalized her suffering as personal fate, a cruel twist of flesh and circumstance. But this spoke of larger tempests, wars invisible to human eyes where betrayal festered like an open wound. Alaric's guilt was palpable, a shadow that deepened the lines around his mouth, born from choices that echoed her own, to endure isolation for the sake of others, even as it hollowed the soul. "I am no flame," she protested softly, retreating to the armchair, the brocade's threads rough under her palms like the scars of unhealed dreams. The fire crackled, embers popping like suppressed confessions, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls like specters at a feast. "I am ash, Alaric, abandoned, fading. What throne could I topple when I cannot even stand against my own decay?" He closed the book with a resonant thud, the sound reverberating through the hall like a heartbeat long silenced. Kneeling before her again, closer this time, he captured her gaze in a web of intensity that made resistance futile. The air between them thickened, scented with beeswax and the faint, earthy tang of his presence. Timeless, intoxicating. "You underestimate the fire within," he said, his voice a velvet caress laced with sorrow. "In my centuries I have seen mortals like you, broken by plague, war, despair, rise to reshape destinies. Your illness is not weakness, but a forge. The prophecy chose you not for perfection, but for the raw humanity that eternity envies." Alara's breath hitched, the proximity stirring something forbidden. A warmth uncoiling in her core, resisted as delusion, yet blooming inevitable as dawn. She reached out, unbidden, her fingers brushing the scar on his palm, the skin cool and textured like weathered stone. In that touch, a ritual unfolded unspoken. A exchange of essences, her fevered heat seeping into his chill, his ancient melancholy infusing her veins with a vitality that eased the ache in her lungs. It was no bite, no dark sacrament, but a moment of profound intimacy, where choice hovered like a blade's edge. To withdraw into solitude's embrace, or to lean into the peril of connection. The ring pressed against her skin, its obsidian warming under her touch, and visions flickered again. Not battles, but quieter truths. Alaric alone in moonlit galleries, tracing portraits of lost loves. Alara in Whitechapel's fog, singing to empty streets, her voice a defiant spark against the gloom. Redemption whispered in the silence. The beauty of suffering laid bare, where love was both curse and salvation, binding them in shadows that promised light. But the moment shattered as a low rumble echoed from the depths of the castle. Not thunder, but the grind of stone against stone, as if hidden doors yielded to intruders. Alaric tensed, rising swiftly, his form a silhouette against the flames. "They are here," he hissed, the words laced with the gravity of impending war. From the corridor beyond, footsteps approached, multiple, deliberate, muffled by velvet boots, yet resonant with menace. The council's vanguard, no doubt, drawn by the prophecy's stir, ready to judge and condemn. Alara's heart thundered, the elixir's false strength faltering as terror clawed upward. She stood, unsteady, her hand still tingling from his scar, the ring's echo a brand upon her soul. To flee would doom him to their machinations. To stay invited her own entanglement in a realm of eternal intrigue. As the door creaked open, revealing hooded figures with eyes like polished onyx, Alaric positioned himself between her and the threshold, his voice a command forged in kingship. Enter at your peril. The flame burns brighter than you know. In that standoff, the air crackled with unspoken oaths, and Alara realized the true perdition. Not death's release, but the heart's awakening to a love that could shatter kingdoms or forge them anew. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The hooded figures breached the threshold like specters summoned from the castle's own veins, their cloaks pooling on the oak floors in folds of midnight silk that absorbed the firelight. 3 in number, they moved with the synchronized grace of predators long attuned to the hunt, their faces obscured save for eyes that burned with the cold gleam of polished obsidian. Vampiric sentinels loyal to the council's fractured throne. The air thickened with their presence, carrying the faint, acrid scent of night-blooming hemlock, a ward against betrayal woven into their garments. Alaric stood unyielding, a bastion of shadowed resolve between Alara and the intruders, his broad shoulders casting a protective eclipse over her trembling form. "Stand down, my liege," intoned the foremost, a woman whose voice slithered like silk over thorns, low and laced with the authority of centuries. She lowered her hood, revealing features sharp as etched ivory, high cheekbones, lips the color of bruised plums, and hair the hue of raven wings bound in a severe braid. Lyrian Voss, no relation to Alara, yet the shared surname twisted like fate's cruel jest, had been Alaric's confidant in the schism's aftermath, her loyalty forged in the blood of shared battles. But whispers in the hidden courts spoke of her ambitions, a Dhampir born of a forbidden union between vampire sire and human consort, granting her half-life's edge, strength without full eternity's curse, a bridge between worlds that made her both ally and enigma. At 300 years, she bore the trauma of her mother's execution by puritanical elders, fueling a desire for a realm where hybrids like her could rule unchallenged. Her gaze flicked to Alara, assessing, hungry for the prophecy's spark. Alaric's hand flexed at his side, the obsidian ring a cold anchor against his skin, its etchings seeming to pulse with restrained fury. "You invade my sanctum unbidden, Lyrian. The council's edicts do not extend to Dravenmoor's heart. State your purpose, or taste the restraint I have so long upheld." The other two flanked her, silent enforcers with hands hovering near hilts, concealed in their cloaks, blades tempered in moonlight, lethal to immortals and mortals alike. Lyrian's lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth, her eyes narrowing on Alara, who pressed back against the armchair, the brocade's threads digging into her palms like thorns of reality. The fever surged in Alara's veins, a counterpoint to the chill radiating from the intruders, her breaths shallow and ragged, each one a defiance against the death that shadowed her steps. She rationalized the scene as hallucination, the elixir's afterglow twisting shadows into monsters, yet the metallic tang in the air grounded her in terror's truth. This was no delirium. It was the kingdom's underbelly, wars of whispers and daggers that Alaric's solitude had shielded her from. "The purpose is etched in Oracle's blood, Alaric," Lyrian replied, stepping forward with a rustle of fabric that echoed like falling leaves in autumn's decay. She gestured to Alara without touching, as if the mortal were a fragile relic. This woman, frail, fevered, reeking of human frailty, bears the mark, the flame that unravels thrones. Our spies traced her path from the moors, drawn by the old rites. The lesser houses murmur of rebellion. They tire of your mercy, your endless atonement for sins not yours. If she is the perdition foretold, we end it here, before she ignites the powder keg. Alaric's form tensed, a low growl rumbling from his chest, not animal, but the echo of ancient grief, the weight of betrayals that had scarred his palm and soul. He glanced back at Alara, his eyes a tempest of conflict. Protect her and invite civil war, abandon her and betray the humanity he clung to like a drowning man to driftwood. "She is under my aegis," he declared, voice resonant as thunder trapped in stone. "The prophecy is a chain the council forged to bind me, not a blade for your ambitions. Leave, Lyrian, while the night still veils your retreat." Alara's mind reeled, the room's textures assaulting her senses. The fire's crackle a frantic heartbeat, the rain's ceaseless drum a dirge for choices unmade, the cool draft from the corridor carrying whispers of stone and secrets. She had sought oblivion in this ruin, not entanglement in eternal feuds, yet here she stood, the unwitting fulcrum of a realm's fate. Resistance warred within her. Love for this solitary king was a folly she rationalized as fever's lie, yet it bloomed inevitable, a thorned vine wrapping her heart. The death she courted felt trivial now, overshadowed by the invisible specter of political carnage, where betrayal festered like her illness, unseen until it consumed. Lyrian laughed, a sound like shattering crystal, brittle and sharp. "Aegis? You shield a mortal wisp while our borders fray? The human wars encroach, armies march with iron and fire, scenting our hidden enclaves. Your isolation weakens us all." She advanced, her Dhampir senses flaring, nostrils flaring at Alara's scent of salt and sickness. In a blur, she lunged, not at Alaric, but past him, fingers outstretched like claws toward Alara's throat. Time fractured. Alaric intercepted, his body a whirlwind of restrained power, slamming Lyrian against the wall with a thud that shook dust from the tapestries. The other two drew blades, moonlight glinting off their edges in lethal arcs. But Alaric's voice boomed, commanding the air, "Enough!" The ring on his finger flared, not with magic, but memory, a ritual of his vow, binding him to non-violence against kin unless survival demanded it. Lyrian slid to the floor, coughing shadows, her eyes wide with shock and something deeper, longing, perhaps, for the connection she too had lost. In the chaos, Alara stumbled forward, her hand finding Alaric's arm, the contact a spark that steadied them both. Heat from her fever met his chill, forging a momentary alliance, a choice etched in touch. She would not flee, not yet. "I am no weapon," she gasped, voice threading through the tension like a fragile melody. "But if your perdition is me, then let it be redemption, not ruin." The enforcers hesitated, blades lowering fractionally as Lyrian rose, wiping blood, dark and viscous, from her lip. Her gaze locked on their joined hands, the obsidian ring bridging mortal and immortal like a vow unspoken. "You choose her, then," she whispered, voice laced with betrayal's sting. "The council will know. War comes, Alaric, not from humans but from within. And this flame, she will burn us all." As they retreated into the corridor's maw, shadows swallowing their forms, the door groaned shut behind them, leaving the hall in heavy silence, broken only by Alara's labored breaths. Alaric turned to her, his face a mask of torment, the scar on his palm throbbing anew under the ring's weight. "You should have run," he murmured, cupping her cheek with trembling fingers, the touch a revelation. Love's curse, inevitable as the dawn he could never greet. But outside, the mist parted, revealing more cloaked silhouettes massing on the battlements. The kingdom's fracture widening, and Alara realized her presence had not just awakened him, but summoned the storm that could claim them both. In his eyes, she saw the dilemma mirror her own, to sever the bond and embrace solitude's peace, or to fight for a redemption forged in blood and fire, where eternity's choice became hers. The silence that followed the intruder's retreat hung heavy as grave mist, broken only by the erratic sputter of rain against the leaded windows, each drop an accusatory finger tapping at the glass. Ilara's cheek still burned where Alaric's fingers had lingered, a fleeting warmth that warred with the fever's insidious chill threading her veins. She pulled away gently, not from revulsion, but from the terror of what that touch evoked, a tether to a world where her mortality was both shield and shackle. The hall felt smaller now, the tapestry's woven battles seeming to stir with life, their crimson threads pulsing like veins exposed to the fire's relentless gaze. Alaric withdrew his hand, the obsidian ring catching a stray ember's glow, its etched surface a labyrinth of unspoken vows that now felt like chains. His eyes, shadowed hollows of storm and sorrow, searched hers, seeking absolution in the fragile curve of her gaze. "Forgive my presumption," he whispered, voice roughened by the echo of command, as if centuries of kingship had worn his words to whispers. "In shielding you, I have invited the fracture I long feared. The council's tendrils reach far. Lyrian's report will summon the houses from their crypts. War, Ilara, not the human skirmishes of your world, but a shadow conflict where betrayal is the sharpest blade." She sank back into the armchair, the brocade yielding like weary flesh under her weight, its faded patterns a map of forgotten intrigues that mirrored her own unraveling life. The elixir's false vigor ebbed, leaving her lungs raw and protesting with each shallow breath, the metallic tang of blood teasing her tongue. Rationalization clawed at her mind. This was madness. A dying woman's fever dream, spun from Gothic ruins and a stranger's melancholy poetry. Yet the massing silhouettes on the battlements, dark forms multiplying like ink in water, anchored her in reality's cruel grip. She had come to Dravenmore for an unceremonious end, not to become the spark in a powder keg of immortal grudges. "And I am the flint," she murmured, her fingers twisting the frayed shawl, its wool rough as the regrets that bound her. A dying seamstress from Whitechapel's gutters, destined to topple thrones? It is absurdity, Alaric. Let them come. I have no stake in your eternity. He paced before the hearth, the fire's light carving his profile in stark relief. High forehead creased with the weight of decisions that had outlived empires. Jaw set against the tide of guilt that had defined his isolation. Born in the clamor of Wallachhia's fortified halls, Alaric had once wielded mercy as a weapon, sparing foes in the schism's bloodiest hours, only to earn their venomous loyalty. The ring, forged from the obsidian heart of a fallen comrade, symbolized that restraint. A ritual band, sworn in a moonless rite to temper power with philosophy, reminding him that every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. But now, with Ilara's arrival, it felt like a noose, tightening around the prophecy's inexorable pull. Kneeling once more, he took her hands in his, the contrast stark, her fevered palms slick with perspiration, his cool as marble kissed by frost. The contact was a revelation, a quiet ritual unfolding in the hearth's amber sanctum. No incantations, no spilled blood, but a profound exchange where her humanity seeped into his stasis, warming the eternal chill that had numbed his soul. "You have every stake," he said, his thumbs tracing circles on her skin, each motion a deliberate choice against the void. "In your eyes, I see the light I forfeited, the raw ache of dreams deferred, the beauty of suffering that time erodes. The prophecy did not curse me with perdition. It offered redemption through you. To choose eternity is to embrace the curse of watching all you love fade, yet in that pain lies transformation. Stay, Ilara, and we face the storm together, or go, and let my kingdom consume itself in shadows." Her breath caught, the air between them humming with the scent of smoldering oak and distant thunder, textures of intimacy weaving through the tension, the subtle creak of floorboards under his weight, the velvet hush of his coat brushing her knee. Resistance surged, a moral bulwark against the inevitable draw. Love was a luxury for the hale, not the condemned, she told herself, rationalizing the bloom in her chest as the illness's final deceit. But his touch unraveled her, stirring visions of a life beyond decay. Shared nights in candlelit alcoves, her voice filling the halls with songs untainted by coughs, his guilt eased by the anchor of her fragile fire. Death hovered, invisible sentinel at the room's edges, whispering of easy release. Yet Alaric's gaze offered a counterpoint, the redemptive agony of choice, where mortality's brevity could ignite eternity's stagnation. "I fear not the war," she confessed, her voice a fragile thread in the fire's crackle, "but the curse of binding you to my frailty. What if my flame gutters before it burns? What redemption in a love that ends in my grave?" Tears welled, hot and unbidden, tracing paths down her cheeks like rain on chilled stone, and she leaned forward, forehead resting against his, the ritual deepening in that shared breath, mortal warmth mingling with immortal restraint, a vow etched without words. Alaric's free hand cupped the nape of her neck, the ring pressing cool against her pulse, its obsidian a bridge between their worlds. "Then we choose the beauty of the brief," he replied, philosophical depth lacing his tone like incense in still air. "Every bond defies the dark. In you, I find the humanity I lost to wars and betrayals, the schism's ghosts, the council's ambitions. Let this be our defiance." The moment stretched, suspended in the hearth's glow until a distant clamor shattered it. The grind of portcullises rising, the muffled clash of steel from the courtyard below. Lyrian's forces had rallied, shadows swelling into an army under the storm-lashed sky, their howls a chorus of fractured oaths. Alaric rose, pulling her with him, his arm a steady pillar around her waist as they moved to the window. Through the rain-streaked panes, torches flickered like malevolent stars, illuminating cloaked legions bearing the council's sigil, a thorned crown dripping blood. Ilara's heart stuttered, the fever's haze sharpening into clarity. She was no longer spectator, but participant in a tragedy redentora, where love's light pierced the political gloom. But as Alaric turned to her, resolve hardening his features, a scout's arrow whistled through a cracked pane, embedding in the wall inches from his shoulder, tipped with silver, a message of intent. He staggered, not from wound, but the implication, betrayal had breached the sanctum. In that instant, Ilara gripped his hand tighter, the ring's chill a talisman against the encroaching night. To fight was to embrace the curse, to yield, to surrender redemption. Yet as the first wave breached the gates, their roars echoing like the death she had once courted, she whispered, "We choose together." But doubt flickered in his eyes, a hidden fracture, the prophecy's true perdition not war, but the fear that her choice might demand his ultimate sacrifice. The arrow's shaft quivered in the wall, its silver tip glinting like a venomous fang under the hearth's dying light, a stark punctuation to the encroaching roar from the courtyard. Ilara's grip on Alaric's hand tightened, her nails digging into his cool skin as if to anchor them both against the tide of chaos swelling beyond the windows. The rain lashed the panes in furious sheets, blurring the torches into a hellish constellation, while the clash of steel and guttural cries rose like a symphony of unraveling oaths. Her fever surged, a molten counterpoint to the chill of dread coiling in her gut. But in that moment, choice crystallized, not as abstract philosophy, but as visceral defiance. She had come to Dravenmoor courting death's indifferent embrace, yet now it loomed not as release, but as the coward's veil, shielding her from the raw beauty of suffering shared. Alaric's face, etched in the fire's flickering amber, betrayed the fracture she had glimpsed, eyes shadowed by the prophecy's inexorable whisper, lips pressed thin against the guilt that had defined his eternity. The obsidian ring on his finger burned against her palm, its etched vows a talisman pulsing with the rhythm of battles long past. The schism's betrayals, the council's serpentine ambitions, all converging in this night of fractured loyalties. Together, then, he echoed, his voice a low timbre resonant with the weight of centuries, pulling her toward the grand doors with purposeful strides. But doubt lingered in his posture, the subtle tension of a king who had spared too many foes, only to invite their blades closer. He feared not the war's maw, but the perdition it might exact from her fragile form, the ultimate sacrifice of watching her flame gutter in his defense. They emerged onto the balcony overlooking the courtyard, the wind whipping Alara's shawl like tattered wings, carrying the metallic tang of blood and wet earth. Below, the council's legions surged against the castle's iron gates, Lyrian at their vanguard, her Dhampir silhouette a blur of lethal grace amid the cloaked horde. Torches cast elongated shadows that writhed like living ink, illuminating faces twisted in fervor, vampires from lesser houses, weary of Alaric's merciful isolation, now ignited by the oracle's promise of upheaval. Silver-tipped arrows whistled through the night, embedding in stone with sharp cracks, while defenders loyal to the king, silent wraiths he had redeemed from the schism's ruins, met them with restrained fury, their forms darting like smoke through the thorns. Alaric raised a hand, not in command, but invocation, his scarred palm open to the storm as if beseeching the elements themselves. The ring flared subtly, not with arcane fire, but memory's echo, a ritual reborn in the moment, binding his restraint to her humanity. "Witness this," he murmured to Alara, drawing her close, his arm a barrier against the gale. "Eternity is no solitary throne, but a choice etched in shared shadows. You are my perdition. Yes, but also my light, forcing the darkness to yield." His words wove through the tumult, philosophical introspection amid the fray, reminding her that every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in that choice lay the seed of redemption. She nodded, the wind tearing at her hair, strands lashing her fevered cheeks like accusations of frailty. Below, Lyrian scaled the walls with unnatural agility, her blade drawn, eyes locking onto Alaric with a mix of betrayal and desperate longing, the Dhampir's trauma of rejection fueling her crusade for a realm where half-lives like hers could ascend. "Yield the mortal, Alaric!" she shouted, her voice slicing the din like a clarion. "She unravels us all. Your mercy has blinded you to the human tides crashing our borders. War demands sacrifice, not sentiment." Alara's heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs, the consumption's ache flaring with each gust. She rationalized the pull toward him as the illness's final illusion, yet it rooted deep, inevitable as roots in barren soil. Love's curse, resisted through layers of disillusionment, now blooming in the storm's raw intimacy. Stepping to the balcony's edge, she met Lyrian's gaze, her voice carrying on the wind, fragile yet unyielding. "I am no unraveling force, only a woman who sought peace in death's shadow. But if your prophecy sees fire in my veins, let it burn for redemption, not ruin. Alaric's mercy is the throne you covet. Embrace it, or be consumed by your own ambitions." The words hung, a revelation rippling through the fray. Lyrian faltered mid-climb, her blade lowering fractionally, the Dhampir's eyes widening with the echo of her mother's fate, execution for bridging worlds, a trauma mirrored in Alara's defiance. The legions hesitated, murmurs spreading like mist. The lesser houses sensing not perdition, but possibility, a king who chose love over isolation, transforming guilt into alliance. Alaric seized the moment, his voice booming across the courtyard, the ring aloft like a scepter of restraint. "Hear her. The oracle foretold not destruction, but awakening. I have borne the schism's scars, spared your blades in atonement. Now, choose with me. Eternity without humanity is a grave wider than any war. The ritual deepened, unspoken yet profound, Alara's hand in his, her mortal warmth infusing the obsidian, a rebirth where death's spectre yielded to love's redemptive blaze. No blood spilled in sacrament, instead a collective pause, the storm's fury softening to a mournful howl. Lyrian descended, sheathing her blade, her form slumping against the gates as doubt fractured her resolve. The legions parted, torches dimming, the political maelstrom ebbing into tentative truce. Whispers of reform stirred, borders fortified not by isolation, but shared vigilance against human encroachments, hybrids like Lyrian, elevated in a kingdom reborn. As dawn's first pallor bruised the horizon, Alaric's eternal bane, yet a promise for her. They retreated inside, the hall's candles guttering like exhausted breaths. Alara leaned against him, vitality stirring in her veins from the night's forge, the fever receding like shadows before light. "We chose," she whispered, tracing the ring's etchings, now warm as forged vows. Life, love, eternity's curse made bearable. He cupped her face, eyes alight with transformed sorrow, the guilt's weight lifted in redemption's embrace. "And in you I am whole." But as peace settled, a faint scar of doubt remained. The prophecy fulfilled not in ruin, but in the ethical precipice of what eternities they might yet face, bound in light's fragile glow. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.